Hey everybody, Dan Sfera, www.theclinicaltrialsguru.com, the only place on the internet where you're going to get authentic and practical clinical trials information. This is not the copy and paste type of stuff, like what is a clinical trial type of stuff that you'll find everywhere else, because everywhere else they're scared to use real language and they're scared to explain it to you in plain English, which I don't understand, neither does Don, but this is what we do. Today, it's been a really busy day, but I wanted to take some time out to kind of talk to you about an issue that, well, I wouldn't say it bothers me, but it's important to discuss, and that's clinical trials in general. Now, there are like 20 million Americans right now in a clinical trial, and there are 50 million 50 million people worldwide. So let me say that again. 20 million Americans in a clinical trial right now, 50 million people worldwide in a clinical trial. So with that many people and that many clinical trials, I mean, there are literally hundreds of thousands of clinical trials going on right now. And they all range from the healthy volunteer studies to the phase 4 post-marketing studies, which are basically using approved meds that are already out on the market. Your doctor may already be prescribing you these drugs, but there still needs to be more data done on them, so they do the phase 4 studies. So there's clinical trials from very risky ones to very safe ones, trials that are almost shouldn't be considered clinical trials but still are. So what does this mean? Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's so many clinical trials out there, it's impossible to group them all into one category and say, okay, I'm talking about clinical trials, so here's what you need to know. It's absolutely impossible to do that. Like I said, there's phase 1 healthy volunteer studies that are first time being tested in humans. These are kind of risky. However, that depends on what your definition of risky is. I mean, very few people die from doing these studies. And if they do, it's probably because they had some kind of complication and they should have never been into the study to begin with. But what I mean by risky is that you will get side effects, or you may get side effects that are still unknown. So they are riskier in that sense, and they do pay the study participant a lot of money. Sometimes a couple $1,000s for like a 2-week, 3-week type of inpatient study. Now, you have the phase 4 studies, which are almost risk-free. I mean, nothing's risk-free, but they're just doing these studies to basically get people used to taking the new drugs and get doctors used to prescribing new drugs that are already available on the market. The clinical trials for these phase 4 studies have already been done. So, and then you have the phase 2 and 3 studies in between. So you have all these different type of clinical trials. Some very unsafe, some super safe, some that I would feel comfortable doing, and some that I would not even feel comfortable putting my dog in. So to group every single clinical trial into one category and say, hey, clinical trials are like this because I heard this, is irresponsible. And I hear a lot of people doing that, and they're saying, well, since we don't know what the side effects are going to be of this drug, or of clinical trials, all clinical trials must be that way. Or the opposite extreme. I know someone who joined a clinical trial once, and he was relieved of his medical condition, and it was amazing, and therefore all clinical trials must be that way. That's also wrong. There are so many different clinical trials out there, it is utterly impossible to group them all into one category. And that's not what Don and I are ever trying to do on this blog. And if anything, the purpose of this blog is to empower you, the study participant, or the potential study participant, or the family member, or whomever you may be. Empower you to better understand the world of clinical trials, the industry that we deal with, and all the different things that go into this industry. And because you become more empowered with this knowledge that we're providing you, hopefully you can make up your mind and make a better decision and a better informed decision when you come across the opportunity to join a clinical trial. Then you can look at that clinical trial by itself, individually, and not as a whole, and group all clinical trials and, look at everyone's bad experiences from clinical trials or every single bad experience in the history of clinical trials and then think that your experience is going to be bad just because of that. Or not look at everyone's good experience and say, okay, there's no problem doing clinical trials. All these people had good experiences, so I'm going to have a good experience too. That's not the purpose of this blog. We want you to make your own decision based on that protocol. We want you to ask your doctor smart questions about the study, and hopefully you can bring up some of the concepts that we've shared here on the blog, like placebo, double blind, IRBs, informed consents, genetic informed consents, HIPAA, side effects, what to do if you're experiencing a side effect. Hopefully we've shared enough of that so that you can make an informed decision about A, joining a study, and B, what to do when you're in a study if you want to withdraw. We've done tons of blog posts on that. So the take-home message is this: there are so many different clinical trials out there that it's impossible to generalize anything about clinical trials. There are risks and benefits to every clinical trial, and it's impossible to say, it's impossible for me to give advice to anybody about a clinical trial that I don't know anything about based on my generalization of the industry as a whole. So you really need to do your homework when you come across a study. Look at the protocol, look at the informed consent, discuss it with your family, discuss it with your doctor, watch some of our videos, and then you can make an informed decision about that trial and that trial only, not about the clinical trials industry in general, because it's so different. I mean, we're not even going to bring up clinical trials in developing nations because, these studies are just drastically different. They're like, they go from like one extreme to the other. And I've heard someone say that clinical trials are like the extreme sports of medicine. Not necessarily true, especially when you're dealing with phase 4 studies where they're using approved medications. There's nothing extreme about that. So, as you can see, there's a lot to understand about this industry, and we shouldn't be generalizing clinical trials at all. We should be looking at each one individually and making smart decisions about it. And this is Dan Sfera from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Once again, that address is www.theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thank you very much.